Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. As always, I need your support. You can donate through the website, geopoliticsandempire.com, or the best way to support me is by becoming a paid subscriber on the Substack. I produce a weekly analysis of world events and schedule every week or two off-the-record Zoom calls with supporters where we just do conspiracy therapy. We shoot the breeze on the world events, and I bring back past podcast guests sometimes to do a live Q&A for supporters. Only you can consult with me if you like about podcasting, expatriating, geopolitics, whatever you like, and check out my affiliates. And if you haven't already, please leave a podcast review over at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you consume Geopolitics and Empire. Joining us for the first time is Lisa Miron, a lawyer who's practiced as a litigator. She's run her own firm and done large file litigation, including files against the government and class action work. She's the author of this most excellent book, which I've just finished reading. I've got the digital version here, World on Mute, How Workplace Speech Committees Are Destroying Our Nations and Eliminating Our Civil Liberties. Welcome to Geopolitics and Empire, Lisa.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. What an honor. Thank you. I've admired your work. So it's interesting to know that you're mentioned in the book even.
Yeah, before we hit record, I was laughing. I'm like, when you mentioned Francis Boyle, I'm like, is she going to mention it? And you mentioned the interview that he gave that hit 300,000 views on YouTube and was deleted. I'm like, that was my interview with Boyle.
There you go. There you go. Yeah. I got to say, I started paying attention and being more awake to globalism only after the trucker convoy, because I'm from Canada, right? So the trucker convoy was the moment that really caused me to lean in, because what was being covered on the press was not what I had friends in Ottawa, right? Was not what was going down. So I'm one of those people who, because I have sued the government and have seen the corruption, and understand that, I was able to start, expanding my ideas about the COVID narrative and whatnot. And what I found really difficult was seeing that there were speech committees coming out of these regulatory bodies. And at first I started to just collect the stories and see that it was a worldwide phenomena. And then I thought, well, but, why is it that every way to earn a living trans-occupationally is being collected? Right. And given these absurd speech committees. And why is it that it's happening globally all at the same time? And, I did math and science before I went to law school. And I just sort of, this is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. We're tossing the coin and it keeps coming up heads. It's impossible for that to organically arise. So I started to see it in a way that I think most people don't see the mechanism, which is that this is one beast, right? These speech committees are not one-offs. It's one system. And so long as we sort of battle these speech committees as, Crowley's regulatory hearing or Dr. Trozzi's hearing or Meryl Nass's hearing, we're just fighting them, wounding the beast. Once we name it the court of the globalists, because this is what it is. It's the globalist court system. And it's my thesis, and I think I prove it, that, this will replace our courts. And it's a heavy sounding thing to say, right?
Yeah, and I mean, some of those examples you mentioned, I brought up before we hit record, and I've interviewed those folks on my LTT radio program, Mark Trossi, Chris Crowley down in Florida, Trossi's up in Canada, Meryl Nass, and just a further example, like here in Mexico, we had recently Gabriel, I forget his last name. So I'm down here in Mexico, just to give a further example, because people are thinking, Western world, Canada, USA, Australia. Yeah. Like here's an extra example. In Mexico, there was this Mexican politician, conservative, and in Mexican Congress, there was a man who thinks he's a woman, and this Gabriel, conservative politician, called a man a man. Because this man who thinks he's a woman, but he's not, it's trans or whatever, and he was sitting in the women's seats, and I think there are designated seats. And Gabriel, who called him out, he got the full force of, I guess, the Mexican speech committee, the Mexican government. I forget the word. They basically went after him, and they I forget what's the legal terms, found him guilty of being a gender-based political violator. And you touched on this in your book. So Gabriel had to post to his ex Twitter twice daily an apology and was assigned re-education. I don't know if he actually took it. And then he had no further recourse. He tried to appeal recourse in terms of law in Mexico. He recently found like a regional human rights court in Latin America that's attempting to help him. But this is just an example, I think, of what you're talking about, no?
Yeah, there's examples like clear around the world. There was the Switzerland journalist Alain Bonnet, and he went to jail for 60 days for calling another journalist a fat lesbian, and she's a self-avowed lesbian. So part of that statement was true, and so I tried to find photos of her to determine whether or not indeed she was plus size. But now we're under this fiction, and I call it, when I analyze the book on the woke ideology part of the silencing mechanism, I analyze it as mini religions, right? Because it's a faith-based system. So, you tell me you're a man right now, and notwithstanding that, or you tell me you're a woman right now, and notwithstanding that I knew you as a man 2 seconds ago, I have to, one, believe that statement. But the bigger thing is I have to believe that you believe it, right? I have to believe that you believe it, right? And it may be like written all over your face. For instance, I give examples of these men who rape women. They know they're raping women as a woman. I have to believe all that. So it sets up these mini micro religions where we're state required to take up this religious system. It's kind of absurd to have these requirements to believe individuals, right? Like, so the bank says they're not going to loan you money, and you say, I want you to believe that I'll pay you back. And they say, well, actually, let's look in your shorts. We're going to actually register, a charge against your home. We're going to put a mortgage on it. There's no other interaction with humanity that we're required to believe someone else's inner thoughts, right? We're not. And, I give the example in Canada in the court system, all courts now start with the premise that witnesses and lawyers must introduce themselves with their pronouns, right? And so here you have like the judiciary who's supposed to be able to, parse evidence and judge someone a liar or not a liar, and they're stuck on whether or not you're a man or a woman. They're stuck there. They just cannot proceed with, cannot move forward unless you tell them. And, that's one of it. One of the aspects is, of course, I also looked at the type of speech that you couldn't discuss. And so it wasn't the topic, right? Like, it wasn't the topic that you couldn't discuss. You could discuss vaccines all day. You can discuss big disease all day. You can discuss transgenderism like every day, all day, every day. But it's the side of it that you couldn't take. And so then I realized that this globalist court system was actually being utilized to hide pillars of the globalist state. So the pillars of the global state, where we're headed, the direction we're going, so that the population doesn't know that direction, we have these speech committees. And so that's whether it's going to be immigration, whether it's going to be, and on immigration, like my view on it is big immigration, which is governed, by the way, with the Migration Compact, the UN Migration Compact, which is an interesting discussion. It's maybe 138 pages, but it ends up, these migrants get digital biometric ID, right? So my theory is they're taking them off the land, right, in their communities in Africa, or they're probably subsistence farmers, and they're not putting them in cities in their countries. They're putting them in cities around the world, right? And it drills down that they're going to get what I call a block ID. So a city ID, where your identification is no longer even, down to the country. It's an identification to your 15-minute city abode. So, everything there's a direction, to all the speech we can't have. It's like circles the globe. I do give examples in OECD countries, but I also give examples in Africa, South Africa, Pakistan. And if you are pro nation state, your speech is going to be culled, right? If you oppose immigration, if you have a agenda, if you're Christian, if you have a pro-life agenda, your speech is going to be culled. And so all of it drills down to a pillar of the globalist state. So I think the book's divided in first medical, then legal and political, then the woke ideologies, which I get into the population activities and eugenics and the modern version of eugenics through population activities, and we can break out into any of these areas. And then I end up with the emergency powers. And basically, the emergency powers that you used to get for, there's a bomb, there's radiation, there's a big disease. You're getting them for speech. So speech is the new emergency, right? It's speech is words are the new emergency. And, I long proposed the idea that just disagreeing with your government is going to be the new hate speech. And of course, that is ever more present, especially in Canada. And I did a couple posts, I think yesterday or over the weekend, on hate speech in Canada. 14-year-old kid wore a straight pride T-shirt, and he was expelled and told by school, that's hate speech, right? That's hate. So we won't be able to integrate reality. And I do want to, to the lawyers out there, I'm really hoping there's, constitutionalists that will listen to this. Because there's several ways that we're displacing our constitutions without a referendum or without, whatever, in Canada, you'd need like a 2/3 majority. You'd have to have all the provinces weigh in. But we're displacing our constitutions in several ways. One, if you need to agree with your government to earn a living, right, that's communism. So we've just inverted our entire society, right, without a tank rolling through, without a bullet being fired. So, that's one. Two, if you check out every pro-nation state lawyer out there, if you check out every lawyer who's willing to bring those cases, and you check out pleading speech, what you write in your pleadings, your statement of relief, what you want, you can eliminate the ability to check executive, administrative, or legislative overreach in our society. You can check out the lawyers who would be willing to bring the big pharma cases. So once you've done that, you haven't asked anybody if they want the Constitution to change. And yet, fathom after fathom, everything looks the same, but you no longer have the perfection of the Constitution, and you have no longer any ability to challenge what is the globalist agenda. So all of the speech committees, which already everyone understands they violate free speech, they don't really understand the subsequent mechanisms. And even you think you can beat them in the ballot box with these speech committees, but I've brought in cases where the council member brought a series of motions about flying the pride flag, right? She had no seconders. She had nobody who was going to vote it through. So the answer was in council. No one would do it. But they sent her to a speech committee, and they suspended her pay. So you can't even beat them in the ballot box. And at the end of it, they asked for remedies that would be instant, so that if you violated the tenets of these speech committees, you're just totally eliminated from council, just like that. Your head's chopped off you go. And then MPs in Finland. So it attacks our political speech, and that's true in the Crowley case. It attacks our pleadings that we can bring. It attacks the Constitution. it inverts our society to an access-based society to, from a rights-based society. And nobody's really talking about it and understands the mechanisms of these speech committees. And they're really dangerous. And I think they have a bigger hold on our life. And I think the podcast community, and I'll take a break because you probably, want to discuss all of this, but the podcast community is a lot of independent people. And so they're not in the grasp of these regulatory bodies. So they may not really understand how much this is controlling the silence out there, right? You have independent farmers or businessmen or landlords, small businesses, they still have their voices. And then those are also the people under attack. And they don't understand the silence we have in our society. And this explains it to them as well.
So many questions here. And I was going to say that, I don't know if I said this before we hit record, but, when I first saw a notification from Dr. Joseph Sansone of World on Mute, I thought, oh, it's a book about speech. But then when I'm reading it, I'm like, this is Geopolitics and Empire. Basically, I mean, you're describing it from a new angle. I like to say, I talk to guests from across the spectrum. Often they're guests, I don't agree with some. Some of them are leftist, socialists, Marxists. But I often say we agree on something. They'll have an analysis that's really good where they're describing from their vantage point a piece of the puzzle that we haven't seen explained like they explain it. So they're accurately describing this global beast. And basically, you're talking about this this global oligocracy. I often, I like to pat myself on the back sometimes because I get a lot of heat daily. But back in March 2020, on Spiro Skouras's program, I was his guest, and I said, the event of 2020 was all about bringing in global oligocracy, rule by algorithm. You touch on this in your book. We use the terms technocracy. I like in your book, because you were just mentioning this, I had quotes pulled out. When someone's over the target, you write the communications that are regulated to precise exactitude are those that are material to achieving a new global order. So I think for those of us, bloggers, substackers, podcasters, when we get really to the point over the target, that's when they debank, deplatform us. Mm-hmm. So as you said, when we talk about the COVID, but if you're talking about what it's really about, if you're talking, if this is why I don't often comment on all this migration stuff and woke stuff, because I feel like in some ways it's a distraction for this digital ghetto that's being brought in, and so I think that's a good point that you make. So if you really hit over the target, that's when they get you. Yeah.
That's when they get you. Yeah. And so, if you can debate a topic and hear both sides, you're going to come to a different conclusion, right? And there's a lot of people, they're just fed media that is one-sided, right? Which is globalist fed media. And I thought to myself, how come you can't hear both sides of the debate? And so it seemed very odd. And then I realized they become truth stampers. So when they have a problem with your speech, it's not like they've gone and examined the merit of it, had a hearing, allowed experts, and debated it. They just become, truth stampers. And, it's a real violation, of our sense of self. But I, too, used to think that the immigration and the woke ideology were distractions. And where I ended up going was that I discovered they're actually quite material to achieving the New World Order. So when we dilute a population, and it's not simply by race, because you have tons of Americans of all different races that are used to freedom, that are used to property rights, and the opportunity to make, yourself, better, like the American dream, or you're used to having political rights and habeas corpus, etc. And so right now there is a race issue, like Biden really tried to make, the idea of neo-Nazis being a huge problem in the US. And we have the same sort of right-wing fascist conversation going on. QAnon, what they make these large claims, and what it really is they need to dilute the home population in OECD countries that understand the Constitution, that understand property rights, that understand freedoms, and that are willing to stand up against those who would trample them. And so when you dilute that population and make the new population dependent on the government, right? For subsidies or for housing or for food or for whatever else, you've really substantially changed your population. And so you have the goal for migration is the dilution of population so that the present population won't be substantial enough to fight the government overreaches. And it's a globalist overreach, right? It comes down to your carbon passport, your carbon allotment, your 15 minutes smart city. And so I realized that the migration wasn't just about, votes, because we found in the Carney election that, that was actually part of it in Canada. 817,000 people came into Canada in certain ridings between January and the vote. So, these things matter for elections, but they matter because we are moving to a one world globalist system.
And just right there, I was going to bring that up. I think you made a powerful point. I haven't heard people explain this previously because, it's true that they want to create Tower of Babel 2.0, right? That's their project. I often say European Union is the prototype, and it is. They say themselves almost weekly now that we need to copy the EU, replicate it to the rest of the world's regions. And so they're creating this Tower of Babel 2.0, this multicultural, mix everyone up like into Babylon for some of the reasons you alluded to, get rid of traditions, which include our political traditions. And as you say, I'm the type of person where, I was just thinking, I don't claim my children as dependents, where if I did, I could probably get tax credits and get some money back. But I have this individualistic American view where just leave me alone, government. I don't want anything from you. I just want you to leave me alone as much as possible. Some of these people you mentioned who come from different parts of the world, and they're happy to receive. They're like, give me free stuff, government, take care of me. And you mentioned in your book, page 60 here, it says, you're saying it's not about the white people. And this is one thing I don't like, because I've commented in alternative media now, you're seeing this rise of white supremacism. It's this neo-Nazi occult stuff. And I don't like playing that race stuff. I defer to Ken Ham of Answers in Genesis. There's only one human race. And I think your diagnosis is more accurate. It's not necessarily about the white race. I think it's part of it is trying to dilute any ethnic group, whether it's white or brown or whatever. That's one thing, but the key is what you touch on. You say, I can only surmise those who enforce this wish to systemize the destruction of the white race. It is too rigorously and meticulously set up to be otherwise. But do they do so because they are racist? I believe no. They do so because it is practical for rooting out those who may have attachment to rights-based orders. So it just happens to be that in Western countries, which are more white, we have this more view of constitution and freedom. And I interview folks who live in Asia and China, and they eschew this concept. They're like, the social credit system is great in China.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it takes care. I get money and I have a good material life. I don't care about the freedoms, And so just thoughts on any further thoughts on that?
So you're right. The social credit system, to a certain extent, is accepted. And when you're first erecting a power, a new power, you're going to make it favorable for people to take it up. But I want people to think, who are in social credit systems that believe that they like it, they may like the algorithm now, but there's no accountability on who drives that algorithm, right? And back to the notion of white countries being more of the freedom-oriented countries. Once you have successfully, attacked that segment of the population, I also put in the book the next segment is just the property owners themselves of any race, right? So to disenfranchise us, maybe this, and this is the part of DEI that's probably true, is that originally in substantially white countries, the power did reside mostly with whites. So if you're going to disenfranchise everybody, start there, have everybody else work, with that program, and you're silenced. I think the government is using our own tax dollars to silence us economically, and by that I mean whether it's ESG or DEI, you put a lot of money making DEI consultants, right? You have to have one in every, organization. And if you don't have one, yada, yada. And those DEI consultants systematically destroy the organization. But all of those people, and some of them might actually be very, soft-hearted do-gooders, right? They're checked out from meaningfully objecting to the technocracy that's coming in, because they're part of the technocracy themselves, and they're paid to institute it, and they have a conflict of interest. They have an internal conflict of interest because they're getting paid for their DEI work, or they're getting paid for their ESG work, right? So the ESG work is going to destroy, secure energy and destroy the economy. And so all the green fools are checked out from meaningfully rejecting these concepts as well. So you've, between green and DEI, and then being a government or working in a union, you've really checked out a large part of the population. And then you have the right. And the right thinks it has to fight the left, which to a certain extent it does, to expose all of these, misnomers that are controlling our society. But the biggest power is in front of us, right? So while we're looking at slavery from the past, or, wrongs that happened to Aboriginals, what's assembling is the possibility of a digital feudalism that will be perpetual for all generations. So it's very useful that they use our tax dollars in the left to fight those who are right-based, and then they create the narrative that they are white supremacists or fascists or what have you, to, I suppose, eliminate or silence them. And that's in addition to the mechanism that I point out.
Yeah, and there's so many things I want to get to. I did want to mention, I was reading Patrick Wood, of Technocracy. He's been in the podcast. He recently on his website did a few great summaries, talking about reflexive law, which I think relates to what you're talking about. I think it's looking at the same thing from different angles. So they're bringing in this reflexive law, this technocracy, this algocracy you also mentioned in your book. There won't be recourse once this is put in. You write, I believe that these regulatory bodies will mutate us into debased, regulated subjects of a transnational order. There will be no mechanism to hold the global order to account. It is set up as a dictatorship while hiding who wields the power. And we're beginning to see this in our daily lives because everything's becoming AI, apps, robots. I had an experience a few years ago with my internet service provider, my ISP. They screwed something up, and they had to come back 3 times. They fixed one thing, but then the technician broke another, and they're moving everything to robo chats so they can eradicate humans, spend less on humans. We all know that story. And the first time I called, I got through to a human. Okay, and then I had to call again, but they saw that I called so many times from the same phone number, they put my mobile on a blacklist. And they said you have to download the app and arrange. It's kind of this Kafkaesque technocracy, and what you're talking about, where you're not going to have any recourse in this technocratic system. And I figured this out that, I'm calling too many times. They don't want me. I can't reach a human now. They blacklisted me, so I used my wife's phone number, which was able to get through a human. So it's that kind of, I think, no recourse type system. And you might be blacklisted because you're a thought criminal, or it just might be the algorithm had a false positive, and you just, for no reason, now you have no recourse, and you'll spend days, weeks, months trying to fix the problem. And I wanted to go back to this point of thought crime. So I've been talking about this for a long time, and I feel like most people don't care. And now we're starting to see it come into being, this thought crime legislation, where now what you talk about, these speech committees, and in many countries like Ireland, EU, they're calling it hate speech laws. And I refer to it, Orwell talked about this. So now they're bringing into law thought crime. And you gave different examples. So if you commit a thought that the regime doesn't like in any country, we're seeing it now. Authorities come to your home. They want to question you. They fine you. They jail you. You become a gender-based political violator, or whatever. And then what I'm freaking out about is you're seeing countries now deploy these I call them electronic thought crime authorizations. But in the UK, it's now called, it went active in January this year, electronic travel authorization. In the EU, they're calling it ETIAS. It's the same thing. And people are now, if they go to UK, if they go to EU, other countries are going to activate this soon. So if you go to this foreign country, you have a passport, you have a visa, but now you need a visa for your visa. I've been saying, where you have to fill out this thought crime authorization. It's social credit form. And if they don't like the way you think, even though you have a passport, even though you have visa-free travel for 3 months or 6 months, this third barrier filter, the thought crime authorization, travel authorization, says no, you can't go. And there was recently this American who was a Christian podcaster. He bought tickets and flights and spent thousands of dollars to go to the UK. He didn't know he had to fill out the ETA, and he was denied. No reason, right? And it was, again, going back to your point of no recourse. And just any further thoughts on this, because it's going to be for travel. It's going to be, as you say, for work. And then we won't be able to function, no?
Yeah, so we're definitely, what I say, we're becoming known online, right? The bills are coming through across the world where we're known online, and maybe they'll institute it for, we have to, child pornography. Well, they put child porn in schools. They do. They put absurd sexualization of children in schools, but on the basis of child porn online, we're going to have you known online. Just child trafficking is a huge business for them. And where I go with the transhumanism is that it's going to be trafficking in humans. It's essentially going to be trafficking in humans. But let's park that, because that's a big discussion. And then you're going to be known in the real world. And known in the real world, you got to look at the chapter for Dr. Tenpenny, because the technology really is there within the COVID shots, that we are able to become known in our real world. Like it is going to work like an RFID tagging system. And so that chapter discusses the patents that I found that legitimize some of the discussion that she was lambasted for. So once you're known online and known in the real world, there really is no escape, right? And you're even seeing with the Trump administration, when they're sending some of the migrants back, they're doing it with biometric ID, right? So this is a funnel system. The movement of people is a funnel system. And the migration compact says our final ID is our city ID, right? So you can't move. You can't go to the EU without this. You have no recourse. Well, once that identification is situated, there's no reason that identification can't be applied at the city level or at the 15-minute city level. So with the speech committees, Once they target your speech, it's going to follow you from profession to profession. So you're a politician, and now you can't work as a politician because you're right wing and you brought a "don't fly the pride flags in schools, banks, or whatever" motion. Then you can't work elsewhere either because that's set up to follow you. And in fact, so what you do at your schools, the anti-bullying policy is the speech committee at the schools. That anti-bullying policy is applied to the trustee meetings and the school board meetings. So that's applied to the parent, and the workplace harassment policies at work and at unions apply to that space. So the speech committees are universal. They work, they're a web, it's globalist, they hide the globalist speech, they are the globalist agenda. And the non-recourse, the chapter on TEDS, to all the doctors, right? To all the people in the medical profession that are staying silent on the shots, on the bioweapons, should read my book and get to TEDS. TEDS discusses that we are moving to AI healthcare and we do not need face-to-face healthcare. So I'll let that sit there. No face-to-face healthcare. It is the discretion of who is running our TEDS system or AI healthcare, whether or not we get face-to-face. Face-to-face is a last resort, not our option, theirs. And they don't describe it as a doctor-patient relationship. They just describe it as face-to-face healthcare. So, Canada's moving euthanasia through at a pace I've never seen, right? They've just recently talked about allowing autistic children, to access medical assistance in death, which is, basically government euthanasia. So TEDS sets up the requirement to have laws in all of our countries, right? And the OECD maps where our countries are with these laws. And a while ago, 2022-esque, the US was only 25%, operable into this system, the AI system for healthcare. But the AI system for healthcare is the AI system for us all. It enters through healthcare. It enters through health, okay? It enters through everybody knew that the passports, the vaccine passes were that system, okay? Or anybody who was thinking. But it says we're going to have legal interoperability. So what Musk is doing on the AI laws have to be looked at, right? He could either, and I have to get into that because that's new stuff, but he could either be blocking, the international order, or he could be blocking the states from stepping out as he aligns with the international order. But the TEDS says we're going to have legal interoperability. We are going to, and all your laws have to say this. These are all the AI laws that you have to pass. We are going to have technical interoperability. So you have to have the following systems in each one of your countries uploaded and ready and tested and betaed. Okay. And we're going to have semantic interoperability. AI will have a code for everything that happens in the universe. And so that's, it also works with the concept of One Health. So, health, climate, that big disease, big climate, that's how, big emergency regulations and the suspension of rights come in. So that's all very useful. But TEDS says, okay, not only are we going to be ruled by AI in healthcare, that's where we're going, and it's there. Like the laws are there. The implementation has been happening for a decade at least, maybe 12, 15 years. Okay, that's been in the works, right? That's what they do at these G20s. That's what they do at these, OECD meetings. That's what you get in exchange for World Bank loans or IMF, or that's what you get. Okay, that's what's fine. Janet Yellen finances the smart city. That went through with Janet Yellen through the Biden era. It was uploaded big time. But back to this AI. So you're not healthy. You just have some data. You're not sick. You have different data. And you're not dead. You have different data. It's completely dehumanizing on a level that I've never seen. And then I love that Liberty poster in the background, but it says freedom will be the freedom of movement of goods, capital, services, is that, children for sexual pleasure, data, and people. So freedom of movement of goods, capital, services, people, and data. So we're going to retain freedoms, but they won't be the freedoms we understand. They will be what the oligarchs use to control all of mankind, and the system's being set up. And I pretty much think the way to stop it is to take down these speech committees. But we're moving really, really fast. Right now, there's a lot of power in those professions, lawyers or doctors or nurses or real estate agents. There's a lot of collective power, but there's no collective knowledge until my book on how the system works and integrates and what it's hiding and where it's going.
I mean, there's so much there. I did want to mention, one thing is you're talking about, well, I think you're using the example of health, but I think across the board, they want to remove the human interaction. Like we saw with the quote, a pandemic, they shut down all the stores except for the ones that they control, the online beasts like the Amazons and the Costco's and the Walmarts. Here in Mexico, hundreds of thousands of small businesses, corner shops went out of business, and it's like it was clear. This was planned for years. I've had guests on talking about this. They've had simulations planning COVID. You mentioned Event 201. There's so many simulations. And then it's recently now coming out. Palantir helped Trump's Operation Warp Speed, and so. Then you saw here in Mexico, as stores shut down, they wanted what came online were online supermarkets in Mexico. I actually used one of them, Justo, it's called, where you can just buy your groceries online through the app, pay digitally, and then they'll deliver the food to your home. So food, as you mentioned, healthcare, telemedicine, that's coming here to Mexico. I just discovered in Mexico City a company where you can get the app and they will send, I call them vaccine hit squads, to your home and vaccinate your entire family, and then come every time you need them to update your booster shots, a few times a year. So it's crazy. And then what you mentioned, you look at globally, CBDCs, for example. Each country's working on a CBDC, and they talk about having them interoperable across countries. So it's like one world system, digital IDs becoming interoperable, digital vaccine passports, and so forth. There's so many great quotes in your book. You talk about at page 398, humanity is being pressed into data flows. Health is being redefined as 9 sectoral data spaces. And you talk about, are we not talking about an AI technical electronic Tower of Babel built to reach the firmament beyond which dwells an AI God? Can the Antichrist be conceived of as a permanent, inescapable technocratic state, which permanently reduces us to the minutiae of our data? And so this has been one of my biggest fears, what you're talking about here, and worries. This digital concentration camp, it's the 15-minute smart, resilient, sustainable cities. They always play around with these brandings, and I was shocked to discover when I came back to where I live in Mexico 5 years ago, it's a resilient city, and I was like, "What's a resilient city?" And I researched. It's a 15-minute city, and I found official government documents from the Mexican government. Like people come at conspiracy theories. Like it literally says Mexican government website, white papers, download them all, and it says Guadalajara's a resilient city. It's financed by the Rockefeller Foundation. They want pre-crime. They want cashless systems, Visa. All of these corporations, you mentioned some. They're all working together to bring this about. And now we're seeing, mainstream Mexican papers talk about we're going to create a 15-minute city out of Mexico City. Other states in Mexico, 15-minute cities. They're taking away our cars. And so, just further thoughts on. I mean, it's really dark. It feels like they're making Hunger Game districts. It's literally all of this dystopia literature and films coming to life. And this week, there's a Mexican activist on Telegram. He, during COVID, he created injunctions for the vaccine passport. Now they're bringing in our like Mexican social security number. They want us to obligate us to get the biometrics. So he's now going to produce people who I'm gonna go with him and pay and get the injunction where I don't want they're going to force us to get the biometrics for your, this Mexican population number. And he also talked about the vehicle emissions. They brought this in 2 years ago in Mexico. Before we didn't have to do vehicle emissions. And he's saying it's part of the Agenda 2030 to take away our cars. And I when I go to the vehicle emissions, I actually hear other people whose cars haven't passed the test. And he says some of the workers actually damage your vehicle, so your car doesn't pass the test, and then your car has been taken away. And so I guess my question would be just your vision of this road that we're going towards of these 15-minute cities, because they're being announced in Mexico, in USA, in Canada, in Europe, in Middle East, in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, everywhere.
Okay, so my next book is called The Municipal Deep State, because the analysis is actually so extensive. So I have an environmental science degree with a minor in chemistry before I went to law school. And I have a master's in conflicts of interest, I should say. And the topic, the carbon dioxide topic, what hides behind big climate is the 15-minute city, is very extensive. We could do a podcast just on that. In fact, I've done, 1 to 1.5 hour podcast to get people up to speed on how it works and how it's coming in. But the sites you need to look at are the Global Covenant of Mayors. And you have to look at the cognitive city. They're talking about drones in New York City policing your energy use, right? Like all of this is either for your safety, for your own good, right? It's always, and anybody who speaks against it is a conspiracy theorist or anti. And I just did a Substack piece that breaks down that once you label something a conspiracy theory, that talking about it becomes hate speech. So the concept of speech and hate and how they define it, like it's so leaps in logic. So they'll say something like, well, we've seen that, people who speak against vaccines hurt marginalized communities and migrant workers, or, and therefore it's hate speech to discuss the effects of the bioweapon and the sterilization and whatnot. And so they can use all the DEI inclusion or diversity in order to silence that. And it is the next topic of my next book. And I was going to do either people as data, the race under the skin, or I have an FDA book researched as well. And this the municipal deep state, because they're all ready to go. They just have to be compiled. And I didn't think I was going to find globalism behind the trucker convoy, but that's what, I started smelling it, and I started to suspect. I started thinking like my opponent. Like I've been trained for 25 plus years as a lawyer, and how I train myself is to think like my opponent. And I just, after a while, I started to figure out how my opponent thought, and then I knew where to research. I knew what I was going to find. I just didn't know what it was. I knew what it was going to look like. I just didn't know where I was going to find it. And Christians are maligned around the world and need to be systematically eliminated by the globalist elite. And they don't even need to be satanic, although there's lots of evidence of the occult in the DEI. There's tons of evidence of it in their logos and their bill numbers and what have you. But I explain in part 3 of the book that the transgender agenda is to piggyback the rights infrastructure and medical infrastructure for the transhuman agenda, right? Because, it comes from the word Greek, cis and trans. And it's also in chemistry, which I have a minor in chemistry. And the bonds are either on the cis side, or they're on, which is the same side, or opposite sides, which is trans. But, they have these chants, which are trans rights are human rights, trans rights are human rights. And I thought to myself, well, of course they're human rights. Are you obtuse? Like why wouldn't trans people as a human have human rights? And then I realized it's about transhuman rights are human rights. This is a Treadstone project. And, we're entering the month of June, and it's very militaristic. None of this is, looks like oppressed people. I always fought, for the little guy against power. And power, is, I have a quote on there on, altruistic power is an oxymoron. And if you think the government really cares about whether or not, you have an authentic identity and wants you to have a good life around it, it's not true. So Christians, like the most woke Christian, the most left Christian, the most, uninformed boomer Christian, sucking the teat of mainstream media or fake news or whatever, never seen a podcast in their life, will intrinsically, innately, firmly reject any chipping. Like any chipping. So Christians are a threat because you do not have to be like QAnon. You do not have to be, conspiracy theorists. You do not have to listen to our great podcast. The principle of being a child of God and made perfect in God's eyes is a fundamental belief of Christians. So if you're made perfect, you don't need augmentation. You don't need, no, thanks very much. Like whatever my flaws are, I'll take them. God gave them to me to, make me learn something or battle or what have you. And so this transhuman known online agenda, known in the smart city, and the AI agenda, all of it really it's going to come down to, I think, the Christians and whatever the right or, people who have human rights squared, right, that are going to be resisting. And I kind of want to pass them around the curve, and I wanted to get the message out while we still have the powers in certain professions to have them battle it. And everyone says, well, like, what are the solutions? Like the smart city, which is why I want to go next in that area. That's your defense attorneys, right? That's your defense attorneys who have to analyze it like a prison system, right? Where you have you haven't been given a trial, you haven't been told what the crime was, but you're being forced into a 15-minute city open air prison. The idea of no meat and that agenda, that's going to be part of my next book. But the C40 agenda says no meat or dairy alternatives by 2030, right? This is 3 items of clothing and no personal vehicles. And then if you look at GFANZ, that is the extension of this. And to a certain extent, you could even look at the Trump tariffs on Canada as the GFANZ. So GFANZ, which was the Glasgow Financial, and it was about, actually, you'd have to look up what that an acronym was, but it's Glasgow something. It was set up by Mark Carney as a banker, and they created a list of what they call red organizations, maybe like 12 of them.
It's the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, which I like to refer to as Death Zero.
Death Zero. Yeah, we're all in the net. And so it had a list of industries that banks couldn't capitalize, right? it has a list of industries that insurance companies can underwrite. So if you can't underwrite, I think it's in section 22, something like 22F of a certain document, and I have it on my Substack. If you can't underwrite and you can't finance your industry, then it's gone. So what were his industries? The personal automobile market, right? So right, we can't afford our cars, or there's going to be all kinds of ways to get us out of our car, the 15-minute city, the ULAZ, and that is the subject of my next book. But the other industries were concrete, so that's building, steel, that's building. So by hook or by crook, the globalists at the top are moving an agenda, and they know that our speech is harmful to their agenda. And so right now, the biggest fight is our speech. And the premise, I introduced in the book, there's only two ways for governments to govern us. And one is through violence and force, and the other through dialogue. And we're losing that dialogue. And so what follows? It's 100% force that follows. And what follows the Malthusian ghettos of the 15-minute cities, like people who can view us in that algorithm fashion, do what's next for us, right? If they've already dehumanized us, that they don't care about our informed consent or anything, what's next for us, right? Yeah, I really think kind of my book is an SOS to get the people who are all governed by speech committees to understand where we're going. And since we're all governed, hello.
Yeah, it's and what you talk about. I'm already starting to experience some of it. Like I couldn't renew my bank card in Mexico last year because they don't accept any more of my passport. They want your Mexican digital ID. And I never, it's a long story, but it's the Mexican voter ID. I never took one out because I knew it would be the basis for the Mexican digital ID. In other countries, they're different. License real ID and license driver's license in the U.S. And I'm like, I'm not getting my when I became Mexican, I'm like, I'm not getting my Mexican voter ID card because I don't vote, and I know it's going to be used for digital ID. I don't want it. And it finally happened, last year. And then, you can't bank. They're already mentioned they're beginning the process of taking our cars away. And then because you won't have without your digital ID now, you can't renew certain other documents that you need for life here in Mexico or in other countries. And so, and I did that interview in 2020 with Edwin Black, who calls it the algorithm ghetto. And effectively, it's, this is the concentration camp. I think there's a continuation from what they did a century ago in different countries, including Germany. And now, they started with technology back then, but they didn't have it. IBM created the first paper computer to start that process. And now they've got the tech, and now they're putting us into concentration camps. And as Black said, they won't even need to send humans. I mean, they're decreasing the police forces because it's RoboCop, right? Or the drones, and they just, with the press of a button, you've denied access to buying food. He says you won't be able to buy bread because, as you said, it's access based. It's a checkpoint. It's permission society now, and basically, I don't have my car. I can't go to the corner store to buy food because there's no more cash, and my card is denied. And what's going to happen? You're just going to slowly starve to death in your home. And maybe, I don't know if what you were alluding to, eventually extermination. And you're talking about the transhuman agenda. I've been recently watching some sci-fi films, Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End and Raised by Wolves, which is the sci-fi film. And in all of these sci-fis, it's like what happens in the end is the elimination of humanity. And just any further thought there, like towards the end?
Well, we are, so that's where you get to the occult and Satanism and hating God's most loved creation, which is humanity, right? So I think we forget who's on our side to a certain extent, right? And I think you have to go to my chapter, Mind War. And Mind War says they really want us to stand down, right? It's a tactic. It's a military tactic to get the subject population, right, to stand down before they do a kinetic war. And we are in the mind war phase, right? We're in the mind war phase, and mind war is to tell us that nothing we can do will work, and we're trapped. And the reason why that's partly the case is when they corner speech, they're also cornering our ability to understand it, right? And to understand our world, dialogue it. Like, I might have identified some problems here, but someone listening to this is identifying solutions. You just need to watch, you want to reframe your mind about actually how lucky we are to be alive now. We are the people that are alive to try to defend the next generations for all of perpetuity. So we've sort of been, in a sense, chosen, and we either rise to that occasion. Like, there's no advantage to going where they want to take us. So how do we get there? Go on YouTube and video and search for babies getting out of cribs, right? Babies escaping cribs, right? We are born to be free. We are born to want to explore our environment. We are born to want to understand ourselves, our relationship with our maker, everything. That's what we're born to do. We either identify as that, right? And so there's this whole idea of like, fear is what they need, because fear is an energy and it's a hard net and we're stuck, right? All the people that are doing this are people, and they all have a ton of employees. The French didn't help the Americans until the Americans could establish that they could, possibly win, right? Right, in the war for independence, right? They just gotta see that there's some life out there, right? That there's going to be people switching sides. There's going to be people who are in on it who don't want to be. There's going to be people who like come to Jesus almost literally, that meet their maker in a way that they understand why they're alive right now. There's a lot of criticism, like the idea of pure blood or not pure blood. Well, I was vaccinated, and I'm working really hard for our movement. We're tapping in warriors every day. And if this is coming, there's just no sense being afraid, right? Right? Because you're never going to outsmart them afraid. And there is an energy like in the world that isn't able to be placed in an algorithm, right? They want to snuff out our God connection. I'm a Christian. It doesn't matter what you are. It doesn't matter to me. That's just my belief, and I'm just not ashamed of it, right? And I think there used to be so much shame around saying that you were a Christian that I'm just like, well, now I understand pro-life in a way that I've never, ever understood it before, because they need you to be pro-death. And once you're pro-death, and whether it's in euthanasia or in sterilization or in abortion or in any of it, you can't have a Chinese wall in your head and really love your life. Like, that's where I got. But that's my own personal journey, and I don't know. That's where I am, anyways, in terms of that.
Yeah, and I just add what you mentioned. They want to go after Christians or people who can see through what's going on, and Christians, I think, because we've got the playbook, the Bible, and we take it seriously. And it's, I've always said from the beginning, one of my guiding lights for Geopolitics and Empire is the Bible and its prophetic guidebook, and then the science. Geopolitics is the science of politics, as I like to say, which you combine the two evidence and you see where we're going, and we're following that trajectory. And I often say, I demand better psyops. Like, seriously, they're false flagging everything, manufacturing crisis to take us along this trajectory, and we're moving along. Something interesting you mentioned. Well, you said in your book, it's not the subject of your book, but about who is doing this. Yeah. But I did want to maybe just ask you, who do you think holds the power? Catherine Austin Fitts was on Danny Jones recently, and I saw the clip. I've been on panels with her as part of the Independent Media Alliance, and I don't always agree with her on everything, but I thought her description of Mr. Global on Danny Jones was actually mostly accurate. And I often cite people like I take from everyone. Mark Passio calls it the technocratic occultocracy, and I think from a biblical worldview, it's basically the prince of the power of the air. It's actual fallen angels. Saint Lucifer was a real personable entity manipulating, and sometimes the alt media, the Gnostic New Agers in alt media refer to them as interdimensional beings. But look, it's the angels from the Bible, and they're manipulating world events to bring this about. The demons and the angels, and so Austin Fitz says something to that regard. But then there's people who say it's the Jews. Like, it cannot be one group. It's also the Vatican. We see the Vatican now. There was the Berggruen
It's
Institute.
also the CCP, right?
Yeah, it's everyone's in on it. So it's not just one group. And there were times of history where Jews had no power, right? And so we had recently the Vatican. I pointed this out on my Twitter feed. The Berggruen Institute, which I follow, they're this globalist think tank, and they've even said there have been reports they want to replace Bilderberg and they want to be the new sort of trilateral Bilderberg. I'm trying to pull it up real quick. The article is titled "How Pope Leo Can Address Distributive Justice in the Age of AI." And so again, they're rebranding universal basic income. They're calling it now universal basic capital, as if we didn't notice the change. And they want the Pope to push universal basic capital. And I'm losing my point here. I was talking about Christian, Mr. Global, right? So it's all these different groups together. Do you have any thought on the mechanism, the hierarchy of the globalists?
I do think it's set up at the top across all people who we think are supposed to be warring. I think the same people fund both sides of wars, which mean, they make money on the destruction and they make money on the rebuild. I can't give them names. I think the Pritzker family is pretty high up, and that's in the transgender movement. They're very high up in controlling that, and WPATH and the idea of synthetic identities. My chapter on Attali to Harari, and Attali was a very uber globalist, and he's still alive, right? And he would be the person to ask. He'd be the person to ask. But he was advisor to Francois Mitterrand, and he said in 1981, like, we are at selling man. And so when you're at selling man, he mentioned this in an interview, not in his book. Because some people have been said, well, he didn't say it in his book. That's a conspiracy theory. So I actually located the actual interview transcript of the interview, translated it. It was an interview that he did where he said this. And that was in 1981. And then we had Dolly the sheep, and we have cloning, and we can even turn a cell in your body into an egg. We can do, all kinds of genetic CRISPR technology, manipulation, mRNA. We can, we have IVF. Now we have even artificial placental technology. It's sort of like the ultimate handmaid's tale. We can design humanity. And, I think I say hip to gullet. And I say gullet because then, we can eat bugs because we'll have the actual infrastructure in our body to do so. And so the vision that they have is, AI can totally sew everything up. And I wonder, are they going to really maybe they live off this power, they like this power, but really there's no one left to oppress, right? They can design their human. That human can be, injected with their chip, with a self-destruct remote activation for, they thought they had their own thought, right? And, my answer to Harari, that, the people who are augmented are going to be left behind. Well, who aren't augmented are going to be left behind. My answer to him is that the augmentation is going to be perpetual connection to the View and Whoopi Goldberg. Like, that's the augmentation, so that you don't dare have an independent thought that they don't want to cover. Who's behind it? You're right, is demonic. because that vision of humanity is demonic. The only, and I may or may not have put this in the book because it's very, if you were very Luciferian, in fact, if you were Satan, if you were that force, you would want to not only destroy mankind, but Earth itself, all living things. You would want to destroy all living things, right? And to a certain extent, the climate movement is that, right? Like the absurd science behind it's, water vapor is the greenhouse gas that by 97% is most important for the greenhouse effect, not CO2. So water vapor. So once you get rid of, if you got rid of the, the carbon, the CO2, you wouldn't have life forms. But then you could get rid of water after that, couldn't you? Right, to just solve for climate change, and we could become Mars. Who's behind it? Yeah, I think it's a very, very dark force, because this view of mankind that you don't care what we think, you don't want to have our voice, you don't want to have our participation, you want to use us like farm animals, you want to take away our voices. It's very slave state. It's very, perpetual slave state. And then anyone born into this is that way. And, I say that the pot at the end of the rainbow is no more women, because as long as you have what I call all men are terminator seeds, right? Like if you don't have any place to implant it, you do not have the ability to have a society that is a threat to them. There, even if you escaped, like there's, if you make only men, a bunch of guys, well, they could be happy on YMCA and whatever else. It's Gay Pride Month, but you can't have a woman, right? You can have all the genders. You just can't have a fertile one with a womb. And that is the transgender, that is the pot at the end of the rainbow. And it is because they've sold us everything else, right? They sell us our land. They sell us our water, our food. They don't want us to have our independent way to gather that. They sell us our information. They tax the shit out of us. Well, if they could sell us our kids, the extension to that is they can create their own labor. They can create their own slave caste. They can do it all. And that's the evil behind this movement. And I don't know if it needs names. You just have to follow their patterns. You have to follow, and I map it out in these chapters. It's like the Malthusians' philosophy was already dark, but then it became the end in of itself, right? So it used to be, we have this Malthusian view because we want to prevent hunger, we want to prevent chaos, we want to prevent, these bad calamities, and so and then the Malthusian philosophy seemed to have changed to, well, we better create hunger, we better create, these horrible circumstances, these injections to depopulate, because the world has increased its ability to feed it. With the increase in CO2, we've had greater ability to farm. We've had greater crop yields. We've had massively greater crop yields. CO2, has increased it. We've had greening of arid areas. I don't name people until I know, and I don't know.
No, yeah, fair enough. And I just wanted to bring it back to some of the speech committees as we sort of wind on down here. And again, I call these people the liberal globalists. In one part of your book, you talk about quote, too many of the elite have been steeped in notions of class and dirty peasants. They assume they're better and thus ready to believe the best people should assume the helm. They don't want to test the masses to agree with them. Thus, they accept the notion of rule by expert epistocracy, identifying themselves with that expertise. The elite somehow impute an altruism to that system. Most professionals may indeed have been groomed for acquiescence and subservience to such a power. And just it makes me think some of the podcast guests that I have on are, as I consider them, liberal globalists. These leftist liberal globalists who believe the official narratives on everything and who are programmed by the mainstream. And they're like, oh, Trump bad. Oh, Putin bad. Oh, far right bad. Oh, anti-vaxxers bad. Oh,
Yeah.
climate deniers bad. And the NPCs and some of my guests, like my jaw drops, not visibly, I hide it from them, but in my head I'm thinking they're actually down with thought crime legislation. And one of them have said they've said they fear like the disinformation. Like they actually say we need to punish people who think things that are not, that I think is not true. And I'm thinking, it's just insane that people have bought into that. And so I just wanted to throw that out there. And I just get your thoughts then on, you write in your book, the reason for writing this book has as its purpose the desire to stimulate thought among men of conscience. And I feel like that's what I've been doing with this podcast, figuring what's happening. And then my thought is like just trying to raise the alarm. It's really bad. So guys, let's do something. Hoping that if enough people realize it's really bad, someone's gonna do something. And so I feel like your thought. I don't think there's really anywhere to escape to, because this is all nations. There's nowhere to escape to. So my only thought is just, what can we do? Is you say, just dissent. Don't comply. Tell other people, dissent, and then maybe try to make some physical preparations to extend your ability to function, to live for as long as possible, which would include, a farm with some water, or having someone that has that, because, you're no good. If we're shut out, if I can't buy food, then I'm dead. So I need to have a plan B in case they hit all of my bank accounts. So just any thoughts on what can we do?
So to the people who are your lovely panelists who are global liberalists, like, they have to look at the system that's being set up rather than their agreement with it, right? It's easy to game, just like a lot of people in China really right now like the social credit system. It's really, when we're transferring our rights-based system to an access-based system, you're saying you trust who's in power. Well, it's okay. Maybe you agree with the speech that you think should be censored. You're on that side of it, or maybe you agree, right? But you got to look at not the speech and not where they're telling us to look, but that the power structure that's being assembled. And so one of the most effective ways right now is for us to analyze the speech committees as one globalist beast in service to the globalist order. So therefore, all pro-nation state lawyers, constitutionalists, politicians across the globe have to decide to take that down. That's the first step, right? You need to take down the speech order in order to get to the next step, right? I'm writing this so that people look at the system I say is erected, call it the courts of the globalist system, call it that, right? I mean, just not just fight it on the free speech. It's a function of the globalist order, and I mean, some people are just, it's Darwin, right? It's Darwinism. A friend of mine works she was an intake triage nurse, and then in Ontario. And when transgender surgeries just started to kick right up, they transferred her, and all she does is schedule transgender surgeries. And she says, like, it's the parents who are all professionals, they're lawyers, they're accountants, and they're the people sterilizing their kids. And she's like, No bus drivers, right? No pulp and paper workers, no, like none of them are sending their kids to be sterilized and have a lifetime of painful medicalization. And so to a certain extent, like we're looking at the ultimate Darwin Award, that if they make it so that in this regulatory system, you're battling to be to get the top awards. You're battling to be the best lawyer and known, right? And in that, so they make it so that you just want to get to the next level. You want to be the who's who, and you're into that game, and you're missing the whole big picture. Your whole society's been inverted. You're missing the whole big picture, right? While you battle out in what they give you in this system. So I think, a functional approach and solution right now is not to go right to the implementation of the smart city. And I think it's all going to go live, and I'll tell you when Palestine's rebuilt.
Is it because, just further thought on that, is it because, people have said that Gaza has been sort of the laboratory for these technologies, or tell us more?
Actually, Israel's the laboratory, right? Israel has more smart infrastructure up. Israel has more, they're watching their population way more. The only place in the entire planet that you could escape the smart city was where you had tunnels. And what cued me into that were the tunnels in Toronto, where you could walk underneath old subway tunnels. They were spending millions to shut them down. They're spending millions we don't have it in our budget to make these plexiglass things so you can't go down into those tunnels, right? So when you mind the gap, right, when you get onto your subway, the car door will only open between these plexiglass things. There's no way, because I'm dyslexic, I store things in like-minded things, and I saw everywhere tunnels being shut down, tunnels being shut down, tunnels being shut down. And I'm looking at the physical infrastructure in my environment of the new cities, okay? So all cities are getting ring roads, right? Used to be there was 1,000 ways to get out of the city. 1,000 ways. You just follow this street, this, right? 1,000 ways. Now there's only one way. You have to get on that highway. And then they're systematically, every few years, taking out an exit. And they're taking out an exit. Then you look at the ballasts, right, that are on the lights, right? And I thought to myself, why are we having these super ballasts? And then I looked, I got top 3% in math in grade 7. I looked, and there's the exact length of the width of the highway, right? Right? So I'm looking at my environment. Now you have bridges being taken down to put up new bridges. And the new bridges, because I kayak under them, the old bridge, they had ways to like walk across, maybe do repairs, like get across if there was a jam at the top. The new bridges, they're all slick underneath. And they have these walls that go up. And I thought to myself, okay. And I know we're supposed to accept only one narrative, and we're supposed to choose our side of it. And I refuse to do so on the war in Palestine. We're supposed to accept one narrative. And the only thing I see is that those tunnels need to be eliminated, just like every other tunnel's being eliminated. And when that rebuild is done, that's your time frame. That's your start clock. That's your start clock. And everybody else can talk about the religious and the oppression, but the reality is that's when the smart city is going to be turned on worldwide. I believe it's the last. Yeah, that's where I'm at.
5 years, 2030, a couple more years.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. That's what. Let's watch that rebuild. I mean, it's already very horrific, the whole area is horrific, and everybody needs you to pick a side on it. And I think it obfuscates what's really going on.
Yeah, and when it comes to the sides, I think of that the tree in Lord of the Rings who says, no one's on my side, so I don't pick a side. And again, who's I'm around narcos who are shaking people down and dissolving. Who's talking about the violence around me in Mexico? So I don't. It's everyone's on about different. There's so much madness going around all over the planet. And so yeah, but all right. Well, we've covered a lot. I highly recommend the book, your Substack, and I know you're working on a second book on my favorite topic of dystopia. And so I look forward to having you back to talk to discuss the 15-minute city digital concentration camps. Any final thought for us, or where people can best follow you?
I would love you to buy my book. You can download the Kindle app to your phone and read it for $8 US, or spend a bit more. I don't make much money. It's a 500-page book, so Amazon's pretty much taking a lot of it. But I love the reviews, and I think it's a new way of looking at what's going on, and it's an important expose on the globalist court system. So I totally appreciate your support, and follow me at lawyerlisa.substack.com. And really, thank you for giving me this opportunity to discuss my book, and thank you for reading it.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know. I've seen it myself. Some podcasters, I have to. I can't interview someone if I haven't at least read more than 50% of their book. And again, all of your links are in the description. World on Mute, your Substack, and yeah, thanks again.